While the statistics vary, it's believed that 55 to 63% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Plus, 1/3 of the US consumers say they aren't currently saving any money. And of this group, 60% don't have a savings at all. This is a problem. Over half of our country is struggling to get by. Not to mention, if an emergency came up, the majority would be S.O.L. You may fall into these statistics, but should you? In this episode, I'm sharing 5 signs you shouldn't be as broke as you are. And if any of the signs apply to you, you'll learn a few steps you can take to improve your situation. Welcome to the City Girl Savings Podcast. I'm Raya Reeves, founder and finance coach of City Girl Savings. I turned my life around with budgeting many years ago, and now I'm on a mission to help others do the same. I fully believe that you can enjoy your life on a budget, and this weekly show will focus on the intersection of money and the city girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Now, before I get into today's episode, I want to answer a City Girl Solutions question that came in. And the question is, I love your podcast. I'm curious, what do you do for fun? Well, this is a nice question. So I love to travel. I think after listening to this podcast, you probably already know that about me, but traveling, I definitely love to do that for fun. I love the Dallas Cowboys. My brother and I are season ticket holders. So going to games or even just watching them on TV from home is a lot of fun for me. I love going to the movies. I try to go at least like once a week. I love going out to eat. So I'm not like a huge fan of cooking. So anytime I have to like go to restaurants and it's in budget, I love to do that. I love to read. I love just my shows. I love Charmed from like the 90s, the original Charmed. I love Sex and the City. A nice unplug for me is watching reality TV with my boyfriend. So we'll watch like Married at First Sight or Jersey Shore, just silly TV that takes your mind off things. But those are some of the things I like to do for fun. So thanks for asking. Okay, so let's get into today's episode, which is 5 signs you shouldn't be as broke as you are. And before we get into the signs, I actually want to spend some time discussing the signs that you truly don't make enough money, right? Because we can say, oh, I'm broke, or I don't have money for this, or like I'm always overspending. But at the end of the day, if you truly aren't making enough money, that's when you are going to need to know that information and then ultimately change it, right? So you may consider yourself broke, but it's because you're bad with spending your money. But you could also be broke because you truly don't make enough money. So I want to spend a little bit of time here so that you can understand if you actually are not making enough for your situation. So the first sign that you don't make enough money, like truly, is you can't cover your monthly expenses. I think this is one of the biggest signs. If you are not able to cover your monthly bills and expenses with the income that you bring home, you don't make enough. And now I'm not saying like going out to eat, getting your hair and nails done, like those are not necessities. So if your income covers the necessities and then it's tied after that, well, then making more money will help, but at least we know it's not a true income problem. But if your income does not cover like your rent, your utilities, your just general necessity living expenses, that's a problem and we need to change that. So assuming that your expenses are all the necessities, right? So utilities, rent, insurance, things like that. If you are put in a position to pay some bills over the other each month, you may need to make some changes, right? So we should not be in a situation where we're robbing Peter to pay Paul to make sure that our necessities are covered. If there are certain things that you can cut back, that would be wonderful. So maybe your electric bill is extremely high. Can we reduce the power usage? Maybe you go over budget at the grocery store. Can you tighten that up? And maybe you have to go to the laundromat. Can we reduce the number of times you go in a month, right? So these are just things to kind of get you thinking about how maybe you can cut back. But at the end of the day, we can only cut back so much. So if cutting back on your expenses doesn't help or doesn't make a big enough difference, you have to focus on bringing in more money. So consider looking for a second job or a higher paying job than what you're currently making. And without a doubt, if you take anything away from this episode, it's that your income must cover your necessary living expenses. If it does not, you will constantly be in the negative. You will constantly be in the red every month. And that's not what we want. So if your income, your current income does not cover your monthly necessities, you don't make enough money and your focus is bringing in more. All right, the next sign you truly don't make enough money is you need to use credit cards for your living expenses. So if you are having to resort to credit cards to make sure that all of your bills and necessities are covered, you're probably not making enough money. And I know it may seem like the only solution, but using a credit card on a consistent basis is a terrible idea. It really puts your future self in jeopardy. You know, the fact that you have to resort to using credit cards means that you just don't have enough cash or money in your bank account to cover your necessities. So if you can't pay all of your living expenses, how are you actually going to pay off your credit card bills, right? Because credit cards are not a lifeline. Yeah, they may buy you a little bit more time, but that money is still going to be due. So if you're not covering your living expenses with your current income, how are you going to cover your living expenses and your credit card bills, right? So that's something you need to think about. But even more, what happens if you reach your credit card limit, right? So you've been using credit cards to help you get by for months and you haven't been in a position to pay it back. And now all of a sudden you're at your limit. What are you going to do? You've been putting yourself in this position to use credit to survive. And now you're at your limit. So you have these exceptionally high credit card bills and you have your monthly expenses that you really haven't been able to afford all facing you, right? So this is a big sign that you're not making enough money. So if you are relying on credit cards for your necessities, you need to focus on bringing in more money so you can put the credit cards away. You know, ideally paying them off is like the goal, right? But we may not be at that point yet. So our first step is let's make sure we don't have to use those credit cards anymore to help you survive. Okay, next sign you don't make enough money. If an emergency came up, you'd be screwed. So you're already in this position where you're not covering your monthly necessities, your credit cards are maxed out, and voila, your car breaks down because when it rains, it pours. With no cash and no credit, what would you do? Like, really think about that. What would you do? Because the last thing you want is to be put in a situation where you can't do a thing until your next paycheck. And if you can't seem to come up with the money to cover an emergency, we need to start focusing on bringing in more money, right? Because the way emergencies work is it's not on our timeline. They don't work like that for me, right? Like when things are already bad, that's usually when something comes up. So, you know, make your life easier by recognizing that if an emergency came up and you are kind of S.O.L, you need to focus on making more money. Things are going to happen that are completely out of your control. It's just the way of life. So being proactive, taking action ahead of time will help you get through the situation as easily as possible. So if you don't have an emergency fund, if you don't have anything saved, if you don't have any means of saving for emergencies, you're not making enough money and your main focus is bringing in more. Got a money question you want me to answer on the podcast? I'm starting a new segment on the show called City Girl Solutions, where I answer any questions you have for me. Money, business, life, you name it. Submit your questions at citygirlsavings.com/QA and get your question answered by me in a future episode. And did you know that we have so many free money resources on our blog, Instagram, and TikTok channels? Find us across the internet at City Girl Savings. Okay, so I've spent some time talking about how you will know if you truly don't make enough money, but now I want to transition to 5 signs you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are, right? So if those 3 signs I walked you through about not making enough really don't apply to you, but you still consider yourself broke, you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are. So let's dive into the 5 signs. First one, you know you make good money. Okay, so you are 100% satisfied with your salary. I mean, obviously more is always good, but like you know that the salary you make is good. But for whatever reason, you find yourself living paycheck to paycheck. You know you make good money for your situation, but something's not quite adding up. Now, it'd be a completely different story if you knew you didn't make enough money, but when you're actually acknowledging the fact that you make good money, you should not be anywhere near broke, okay? But if you are finding yourself living paycheck to paycheck, all is not lost. There are likely some spending and behavioral changes that need to be made. But guess what? That's all in your control. So when you know you make good money, you can start taking those necessary steps to help you break away from living paycheck to paycheck. And the first thing I'd recommend you do is looking at your budget and taking a step back. If you don't have a budget, the first thing I'd recommend you do is get a budget in place. But let's assume you do have a budget. Take a look at it and see where you can cut spending or reduce spending temporarily, right? Like this does not have to be a long-term solution, but the goal is for you to get to a surplus or have extra money. I like to call it a buffer in your checking account so that you don't actually have to live paycheck to paycheck. So high level example, let's say you make $5,000 a month and your budget says that after your bills, expenses, and everything, you should have $1,000 left. So that $1,000, you've been spending it, right? You've been going out to eat, you've been getting your hair and nails done, you've been doing all of the things. Maybe for a month or two, you cut back on those things and only spend $500. That means you'll have $1,000 saved or put in your checking account as a buffer after 2 months. So that's what I mean. Like, look at your numbers, look at your budget, see where you can reduce your spending temporarily so that you can build a little bit of a buffer so that you truly can break free from paycheck to paycheck. Okay, next sign, you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are. You know you spend a lot, especially on things you don't need. So number 1, having self-awareness is such an important part of life, but it's also an important part of your financial situation. So if you are like 100% aware that you are spending too much, that's good. We need to have that awareness. We got to know there's a problem before we can fix it. But once you do know, you got to do something about it, right? You can't just be like, well, I'm just an overspender and that just is what it is. And that's how my life is going to be. No, it's not how your life is going to be if you decide that's not how it's going to be, right? So if you put your foot in the ground and say, you know what, I spend a lot, I shouldn't be as broke as I am, but I want to move forward by controlling my spending, you get to decide that. And that's what can happen next, right? Easier said than done. I recognize that, but you do have to take responsibility and make the choice to change. So if you know that you're an overspender and you're likely spending your money on things you don't need, you probably shouldn't consider yourself broke. Spending money, especially money you shouldn't be spending or money that should be saved or put toward your debt, is one of the quickest and most effective ways to go broke, right? So when you're constantly overspending, you're going to end up not having enough or not having what you need. But this is where the awareness comes in. are you fully aware that you spend more money than you should on unnecessary things? And if so, you got to take that ownership. You got to get your spending under control. It doesn't have to be a drastic spending fast where you completely freeze all of your spending and don't spend a dime, but you have to cut back. So, kind of how I mentioned a little bit earlier, take a look at your budget, see what you should have left over after your bills and expenses are covered, and try your best to keep some of that profit in your account so that you can build that buffer. At the end of the day, like, you will always be broke if you're constantly spending money, especially on things you don't need. So give the unnecessary spending a break just for a little bit and watch how your situation changes for the better. Okay, next sign you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are. You put money into savings, but you usually take it right out. So I know this is probably an unpopular opinion, but not all savings is good savings. Okay. So we may have the best intentions when we put our money into savings, but if we're always taking that money out, we're doing so much more harm than good. Not to mention that behavior, you're like training your brain to think that it's okay to take from savings. And it's not. A savings is designed to sit there until you reach a goal or until an emergency comes up and you absolutely need that money. Savings is not there for you to just constantly put in and take out on a regular basis. That's not the purpose of savings. So when I say not all savings is good savings, if you're constantly saving more than you can afford to, or you're constantly putting money into savings only to take it right back out, that's not helping you in any way, shape, or form. So this is where having a solid budget can play a huge role. When you don't have a budget that tells you like what you can afford to save after all of your bills, expenses, and other spending are accounted for, you run the risk of putting too much into savings or maybe not even saving as much as you possibly could. And this usually means that other priorities can't get taken care of if you're putting more into savings than you can afford, right? Unless you're pulling that money right back out, which is typically the pattern. So if you are putting money into savings, but you usually have to take it out to cover bills and expenses, you shouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck. You are just putting too much into savings. You're saving too much on a regular basis. You should be putting into savings enough to ensure that your accounts aren't dry, like your checking accounts. Like, make sure that you have money in your checking to cover everything and leave a little room for something to come up, right? I 100% appreciate the notion of trying to save as much as possible. But again, if you're saving too much, it's doing more harm than good. I also want to add that this is all assuming that you have control of your spending, right? So if you are putting money into savings and the only reason you're pulling that money back out to cover your bills and expenses is because you spent the money for your bills and expenses, then you have a spending problem, not a saving problem, right? So make sure your spending is in control as well, right? Because your savings should not cover indulgences or non-necessities. That money should be staying in savings in case of an emergency. So if you have to pull from savings to cover bills, then you're putting too much into savings to begin with. But if you have to pull from savings to cover bills because you spent your bill money because you're an overspender, that is a spending problem and not a saving problem. Okay, next sign you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are. You make consistent money, but you don't have a budget. I mean, you got to know I'm going to come to this, right? A budget is a non-negotiable. You got to have a budget. We all do, no matter how much you make, how little you think you make, we all need a budget. So if you are living paycheck to paycheck and you don't have a budget plan, that's a huge problem. And in fact, if you don't have a budget plan, but you consider yourself broke, I'm going to need you to create a budget as soon as possible, because that's the only way to really know if you're broke, right? A budget will show you what money is coming in, what money is going out, and what's left over, right? And that information is what's going to tell you if you're broke or not. Now, if the thought of budgeting, creating a budget, having a budget, sticking to a budget is like just torturous for you, like in your mind, like it's just, you hate it. You have pure disgust. I want you to listen to episode 3, Breaking Through the Stigma of Budgeting, because we got to shift that mindset, right? Like a budget is a good thing, a helpful thing. It's only positive. So I will link to that episode in the show notes. Okay. Final sign you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are. You are in the same financial spot year over year, but you make more money year over year. So if you get raises every year and, bonuses and extra money just is coming your way year over year, but your debt is still the same, your savings is still the same, everything is kind of the same, you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are, right? Every year, we should be increasing our net worth. We should be building our wealth. We should be paying down debt and building up our savings, right? And even if it's 1% change, right? Or even if it's just an extra $100, as long as we are improving year over year, that is the goal, right? But if you're always staying the same, yet more money is coming in, you're probably overspending, right? And lifestyle creep is real, right? Lifestyle creep is, when you make more, you spend more. It's totally normal, but we have to recognize it so that we can be in a position to be building that wealth. So whether you make good money here is irrelevant, right? Like this is not about making good money. It's about always improving, right? So if you are making more money every year, then you really should be getting ahead, even if it's on a small scale. Now, I'm not saying drastic improvements are required, right? But steady, continuous growth is a must. And if you're not doing that, something's a little bit off. All right. So now that you know the signs that you don't make enough money and the signs that you probably shouldn't be as broke as you are, you can assess your situation, take action, and move forward accordingly. And that is what I always want from you if you listen to my podcast. I always want to leave you with something that you can do, a next step, something to help you take action so that we can change for the better. Now, if you don't make enough money, just to quickly recap, if you truly don't make enough money, your goal is bringing in more money, whether that's through a raise, a side hustle, a second job, whatever. Now, if you do make good money or you make enough money and you shouldn't be as broke as you are, your goal is getting on a budget and controlling your spending. All right. Before I let you go, did you know that I create budget plans for clients and I offer one-on-one money coaching? I coach my clients to break through habits that are not conducive to positive money routines. I help my clients create the money routines and shift the mindset so that they can see true success with their money. They can create a budget and stick to it. You can learn more by checking out citygirlsavings.com and clicking the financial coaching page under Work with Raya. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you soon. Thank you so much for tuning in to City Girl Savings today. I hope you feel empowered and inspired to master your money as you make your way to your dream life. Make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when a new episode comes out. I truly value your thoughts and feedback, so please leave a review and let me know how this podcast has impacted you. Can't wait to chat soon and make it a great day.